So we're going to continue our studies in the book of Genesis. And therefore, let me just first of all share this with you. So we are going to continue studying. So just to summarize a little bit from Genesis. So far in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1 and verse 2, what we have learned so far is that in verse 1, it is the age of creation. It begins with the creation of the heaven, which is the city of God. This is something which people, they have a very vague concept of what the heaven, with the definite article, the in front of it, what this place is. It is a city. The Bible is quite clear about that. This city is the highest point in creation. And in that city, I'm sure there are levels. And the highest, of course, is where the throne of God may be found, from which he rules and reigns over all his creation. So that was the first age of creation in which God created the city, and then he filled it with inhabitants. Those are the spirit beings. They're called generally, go by angels, although there are many varieties and different types of angels or angelic beings or spirit beings. They are the residents of the heaven. And then outside heaven of the heavenly places themselves, because the heavens with an S, the plural, as distinguished from the heaven, are the heavenly bodies such as the sun, moon, and stars. So there are these celestial bodies which have some kind of connection to living creatures like the angels, because in the Bible, for example, stars are symbolic of angels. So the creation of God is very vast, and it's also filled with far more creatures than we can ever begin to count. What we see here on the earth itself, especially in regard to man, this is a very small number of everything that exists. And all this began to be created by God in the beginning, beginning with the city of heaven, and then, filling it with inhabitants. And then he went on to create the earth. The heaven and the earth were not created at the same time. That's what the Bible teaches us. So the earth was made some point later, and then it was filled also with inhabitants. Like the heaven was filled with spirit creatures, such as the angels, the cherubim, seraphim, and some other creatures that are mentioned in the Bible, the archangels, etc. But then the earth was not meant for angels. The angels are beings of spirit. The earth is a body. It's a terrestrial body. It is different. It is meant for creatures of flesh. And the first creatures of flesh that God created were the sons of God, about whom we can read, especially in the book of Job in chapter 1, 2, and 38, and also in the book of Genesis in chapter 6. So these sons of God, although it's commonly and falsely taught that they were angels, they are not angels. They are very much man-like, corporeal, flesh and blood creatures. They were the first inhabitants of this earth. The earth was first given to them. And that's why we can read in Job 38:7 that the sons of God shouted for joy when God laid the foundations of the earth, and they were witness to it. God had originally created these inhabitants of the first earth. Long before the earth was made, he made them up in the heaven, in the city of heaven itself. So they came into existence in the heaven, wherefore they are celestial beings. They are not of the earth. Although they came to dwell on the earth, they are not of the earth. The man of earth was Adam, who came much later. So that was the first stage of creation about which we read in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. I'm not going into any detail here because I've covered it in great length as to, different portions of scripture that tell us what God did. So, for example, in Proverbs chapter 8 and in Job chapter 38, especially in regards to the foundation and the forming of the earth. So then we get to Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, which reads, that the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So what we are, as we studied in the last couple of meetings, is that this is describing the earth in a state of ruin and destruction. This we understand from verse 1 and all the portions about the forming of the earth. We understand the earth was not created in the condition in which we find it in Genesis chapter 2. Especially there's two pieces of evidence. One is the existence of darkness. Darkness symbolizes evil. For example, you can read, in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, in whom the God of this world has blinded the minds of them which believe not. So when minds are blind, what are they? They're in darkness. So darkness is symbolic of evil, which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them. So when there is darkness, it's absence of light. Okay. So that is that the minds are evil. They're covered with the darkness of evil. Therefore, they cannot comprehend the light of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So this here, then we continue to go on to read in verse 6 in 2 Corinthians, for God who commanded the light to shine out of darkness. So light and darkness are always contrasted, black and white, life and death. These are opposing forces or powers, you could say, spirits, energy, whatever, God, devil, who are the opposites of each other. And this is something that God had purposed right in the beginning that he was going to do, that he was going to create his own opposites. For his light, he would create darkness. For his life, he would bring in death. Okay? For his good, he would allow evil to exist so that when one is contrasted to the other, we can come to understand both of them. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it was called the knowledge of good and evil. It was not the knowledge of good or evil, which means that in order to understand good, it is important, it is necessary, no, not just important, it is necessary to understand evil, without which you can't understand good. You can't understand what kindness. God is called loving kind. His loving kindness, his long suffering, his mercy. We understand these from the Bible, that his mercy endures forever. But unless we understood judgment and cruelty and pain and suffering, these concepts are beyond our understanding. So this here, the presence of darkness in Genesis chapter 2, it symbolizes the existence of evil, that evil had come into existence as planned and purposed by God, because in 2 Corinthians 4:6 we read, for God who commanded the light to shine out of darkness has shined in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. So that light of the knowledge of God, it could not shine unto us until the darkness had come. So in Genesis chapter 2, when darkness came to cover God's creation, it was symbolic of evil having come into God's creation and filling it with evil, which is that the fullness of evil had arrived before God would begin his recreation, which we are going to read about now. From Genesis chapter 1, verse 3 onwards, these are the 6 days into chapter 2, are the 6 days of recreation, of replenishment, of refilling, of rebuilding something that had once existed but which had been destroyed. So all those ages of destruction, they were a result of this darkness of evil that entered into God's creation through the race of angels, through the anointed cherub of Ezekiel 28, and then through Lucifer in Isaiah 14, and finally through Satan. These are 3 different beings. They are existed in 3 different ages, although their ages of existence may have overlapped, which I'm sure it did, that they did at one point in time exist together, but their end did not come together. The angels were cast down and locked up in hell, and there they will stay until the day of judgment. Lucifer and his sons of God, evil men, were cast down. They were also thrown into the pit. The pit, by the way, is different than hell. So these are 2 different locations underneath the earth, yes, in which these first 2 groups of evildoers, who were led first by the anointed cherub, and the angels were, and then Lucifer, the sons of God, get the men that existed prior to Adam on the earth. Their leader was Lucifer. Those 2 groups were judged. Then there was a third one, the beast, the serpent dragon, Satan. He also was judged partially, you could say, at the end of the last age. So the ages can be divided. The first age of creation in Genesis 1:1 can be called the golden age. And then when evil entered into God's creation, about which you read Ezekiel 28:15, through the anointed cherub. That would be the Silver Age, that creation had not yet fully deteriorated, but decay and corruption had set into it, darkness had entered it, but it had not yet become full darkness. So that is the Silver Age. And then at some point in time, once these angels had been judged and condemned to hell, then the baton of evil was picked up by Lucifer and the sons of God, men who are also worshipped as gods up until this very day on this earth. Okay, they're supernatural men, you could say celestial men, men from the heavens. So this age will be called the Bronze Age, in which Lucifer was the head of evil in this earth until he too fell from heaven. Not from the heaven of God, he was actually rising up into the heavens to pass through them. About Jesus, we read, the Son of God has passed through the heavens. To get to the heaven of God, the city of God, you have to go above all the stars and all the other heavenly bodies, okay, because it lies above it. Thou hast set thy glory above the heavens, we read in the Bible. So that's what Lucifer was attempting to do. He said, I will set my throne above the stars of God. So he was trying to rise up there into the heavens, and from there he was, whatever forces that God sent to meet his armada, you could say, they were all crushed and cast down to the earth, from where he was cast into the bottomless pit. So his age, you could call it the Bronze Age. And after that, there was the age of the Satan, serpent, and dragons on this earth. Yes, dragons are real, and they did exist in physical form right here on the earth. And they built, okay, the evidence of their construction and what the world that they built, it exists up unto this very day, that serpentine world. It's the ruins and the evidence that is scattered across. Actually, I saw this video, this on YouTube about this temple. I think it's in Sri Lanka or in Thailand, about this, giant serpent. It's literally like 100 feet long. This serpent, built out of stone, and those kind of structures are everywhere. These are from the last age of evil, which came just before Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. So these three ages of evil, they are what we call the gap. They are the gap of ages that fits between Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, when God began with the perfect creation, and before we get to Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, when the earth was ruined and destroyed, creation was destroyed and covered with darkness and filled with water. Then those three ages, the silver, the bronze, and the iron age of Satan, they fall in there. Now, Satan was the last ruler of evil on the earth and in creation prior to Genesis 1, 2, prior to, the earth being without form and void and darkness covering the face of the deep. Okay. So here was his world, his creatures, these creatures, they were the chief rulers. They had taken the earth over, not just these serpents and dragons. There were all kinds of other abominable creatures that exist, hybrids of various, forms and shapes and mixture of different species. All kinds of evil happened on this earth, which we can't even begin to fathom. One day God will show us, and we will be totally shocked. It'll be far beyond any science fiction movie that we might have seen. Like in Star Wars, for example, you can see a lot of these type of evil creatures that they show you, but that is nothing compared to what actually has existed on this earth and still exists, at least in spirit form. Because these creatures weren't real, they were bodies, they were bodily creatures that had existed on the earth. But just at some point in time, when the darkness of evil had reached maximum, full darkness that God had planned that it would, when evil had become absolute evil in Satan, that's when God brought destruction upon those worlds that existed here prior to making Adam, for whom he had purposed creation, that through man he will replicate and reproduce himself, about which we've also discussed in the past as to the purpose of creation. But before he brought this man, he needed evil in its full glory, in its full measure, a full age, a full height of the tree of evil to have grown before God could make man. So that had happened. And how did that happen? That is when God judged that world. That is when he drowned it in this water that was far greater in volume than the water of the flood of Noah. This water did not just cover the earth and the mountains. This water reached right up into the heavens, extinguished any of the heavenly bodies that existed. So we can read, for example, in Jeremiah 4:23, I think, that he beheld the heavens and there was no light. That didn't happen in the time of Noah. So the presence of darkness and the presence of this water on the surface of the earth, which I proved to you last time, that God, when he made the earth, he made the seas, he dug them up, he filled them with waters, he had put the fountains underneath from which this water comes. However it comes, I don't know. But he filled it up, but he also gave the sea a command that you shall not pass the bounds that I'm setting for you, which bound, of course, was the shoreline. So darkness did not exist in the beginning because God is light. Darkness is symbolic of evil. Evil did not exist in the beginning of creation. It was born in the Inonic cherub at a certain particular time. And it is only after that that darkness began to enter creation. So therefore, darkness did not exist in the beginning. The earth was not covered with water in the beginning. So these teaches you, and it was not a ruin. Okay, the word without form and void, bohu and tohu, about which I have done detailed study last time. These mean ruins. They mean wasteland. They mean chaos. Okay, and we shall read here now when we go into Genesis chapter 1, again, reading about this light and darkness. You shall see something interesting, that the light and darkness in Genesis chapter 1, they are capitalized. That in verse 5, it tells us God called the light day and the darkness he called night. So day and night are both in capital letters, which means that these are proper nouns. These are creatures that God, these are representing some beings, okay? And night, for example, in Greek mythology is a spirit, is a god or a goddess called Nyx, okay? And Nyx is the one that apparently gave birth to chaos. Night, being symbolic of darkness and evil, you could say is Satan. Did Satan and his evil give birth to the chaos without form and void that we bohu and tohu, which we read about in Genesis chapter verse 2? Yes, it is the judgment of that evil that brought the chaos that we find the condition of creation to be in verse 2. And therefore, that is again linked to in mythology. Mythology tells you history, real history, but in fictionalized form, without giving God any credit, without mentioning Jesus, okay? They just tell you all these things just happened. Oh, there was this goddess called Nyx, and then, she gave birth to chaos, and that's how the creation was in the beginning. All these stories have certain truth in them, but they are not the truth. The truth is found only in the Bible. Jesus said he is the truth. He is the absolute truth. In him there is no lie. God cannot lie. So if you want the whole truth, then you turn to the Bible. You want to find pieces of truth elsewhere, then you can find them in mythology, in myths, in fiction, in legend, in science, all kinds of places. They all are lie, but in that lie, you can dig through them and find some truth. So that was one of the truths, this Nyx is a goddess who gave birth to chaos. And that chaos is what we see. So when you put it into the biblical perspective, yes, night, capitalized, is a spirit. It is the spirit of evil. Who's the father of evil in this time? It is Satan. So it's symbolic of Satan, that it was his evil that brought the judgment of God upon the worlds that existed prior to the recreation, which we will talk about now, beginning in verse 3. And that was happened because judgment was passed upon the world and the inhabitants. So these serpents, dragons, hybrids, all kinds of abominable creatures, and even these sons of God, men running around doing all manner of evil on this earth, God judged them and he drowned them. So then, obviously, their bodies died. So now they are continuing to live as disembodied spirits. That's where these evil spirits of today came from. That's where these creatures called demons come from, okay? And they are not angels that God made. The angels that God made who sinned against him, who rebelled against him, they were punished. Not punished, they were, punished too, but they were judged and cast down into hell long time before the judgment of Satan came, okay? So the last world that existed on this earth was the world of Satan. This flood this water that covered the earth. You could call this the judgment of Satan's flood. A lot of people call it Lucifer's flood, but I think Lucifer himself had already been cast down before then. So the final judgment was upon the serpent, dragon creatures that inhabited the earth, and therefore it was the flood of Satan. Now let's continue on to verse 3. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So we see that this darkness was upon the face of the deep, just as God required it. It was full darkness, which means that evil had grown to full age. It had grown to the full measure that God needed it. It had become the full and complete opposite of God, which is what God needed. Okay. So now God is light. So does that mean, that when God said, "Let there be light," is he like creating light? No, God is light. Light has never gone away. It is that evil brings what? Blindness, which I read to you from 2 Corinthians 4:6 or 4:4, in whom the God of the world has blinded. So evil brings blindness. So these creatures of that time, because they had been blinded by evil, they became covered in darkness. So they couldn't see the light. And now God is going to make this light to shine out of this darkness. So what he's going to do, he's going to make his light visible. This verse, "Let there be light," it tells us, "Let there be God," because God is light. So this is the education of God. Okay, now he has that perfect contrast. Now he has that absolute opposite of his in existence. So now he can tell his creatures, now here's darkness, here's light. You are in the middle. Look at both. And can you see the difference between them? Okay. Now do you understand what light is? So this is God beginning his education for all his creatures, but especially a man, by using the darkness that had existed. And when God said, "Let there be light," we shall continue to read that, the darkness, he didn't make it go away completely. The darkness was still kept around because God needed that darkness. He needed that evil yet, until the time that he himself would take the form of a man and be hung on a cross to die for man, to prove his love. Until that point, evil was needed. And after his resurrection, he has determined that after a certain period of time, he will come back and he is going to eliminate that evil and darkness forever. So that is the reason why God let this darkness to continue to exist. And God said, "Let there be light," which means that he now had made it become possible, because of this evil and darkness, for his creatures to begin to see God. Before them, even like the angels who stood in God's presence, they couldn't see him, in the sense that they couldn't understand him, at least not fully, because they couldn't understand his nature. They couldn't understand that he is good. They couldn't understand that he is love. They couldn't understand that he is kind. They couldn't understand that he is merciful. To prove all that, to teach all that, he needed this evil to exist. So when God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, that means that God himself had now started to become visible to his creatures. And now God is starting our education in good and evil. He is going to begin to teach us now. And that's why it tells us in verse 4, "And God saw the light that it was good." Okay? Up until that time, until evil existed, there was no way to teach any creature, including the angels, what good meant. So therefore evil was needed. There was no way to teach angels, who themselves are creatures of light, what light is, until they had seen the darkness. Because if you place a child and leave him in a room filled with light and never let him see darkness, he will not understand what light is. Therefore, that darkness was very important. It is now that they can begin to see, and now God teaches the angels as well, because we read that in the book of Peter, for example, that there are things that the angels desire to look into. So angels also have a hunger for understanding and for knowledge. Okay? They don't hunger for the bodies of women. Another lie that they tell you, that they were lusting after women. Any people that tell you that, that is such a gross distortion of truth that makes me angry. But anyways, of what the Bible teaches, no. But they do hunger for that. So God is not just teaching all these things that happen in his creation. It is all bringing all of his creatures to knowledge of the Creator. And that includes the angelic races. But this was ultimately meant for man. The completeness of this knowledge, which can be summed in one sentence, God is love, was reserved for man. And that's what makes man special, that full revelation of the love can only be provided to man. That love can only be replicated and recreated and the part of man alone that can be filled with all of that love of God. Not the angels, not any other creature, only man. And therefore, man alone has the capacity to fully understand God, but fully understanding his love. Okay? And that is what all of these things that happened in the ages before this day came when God said, let there be light. All that had to happen before the ages of the golden, the silver, the bronze, and the iron. By the way, the iron age of Satan, although he was judged in his body and destroyed, and now exists as a disembodied spirit. Okay, that age is still continuing. We're still living in that iron age of Satan. Okay, we are. So that iron age is going to come to an end at the return of Jesus Christ and after his millennial kingdom, when he destroys Satan and casts him into the lake of fire, and he is finally finished. All his evil henchmen and he or hench spirits or whatever they are going to be gone from God's creation, and then will be left light and righteousness and love. That's what will be left in creation, and joy and pleasures. Things that we can't even begin to understand what pleasure means for God. The pleasure of man is, to eat some good food or whatever, have some, do some kind of activities that he thinks are pleasurable, but that's not the pleasures of God. The pleasures of God are the pleasures of love, which we can't really, no matter how hard we try, we can never fully understand or even begin to scratch the surface of understanding. But in Revelation 4:11, we can read, that thou hast created all things, and for that pleasure they were and are created. So what these pleasures are that God has purposed for himself, and that involves us, I don't fully know, but I'm looking forward to it, because this is a life of turmoil and suffering and burdens. It'll be nice not to have any of that. To be light, my burden is light, and to laugh and to be joyful and to the joy of the Lord. Like, what is this joy of the Lord? We get little glimpses of it in this life, but not what God has purposed. We will only see that once we leave this world and we are fully the new creatures in Christ that he has meant us to be. So God saw the light. God let there be light, and there was light. And again, it is not that God is creating light. God has always existed, so light has always existed. But now it's like turning on a switch that, the room was dark, the light came on now. Everybody can see the light, which means they are now finally getting to see their Creator. His knowledge, his understanding is going to come to them. And God saw the light, that it was good. And this is the first time in the Bible that we have this word good that is being used. And it is, and that tree of the knowledge of good and evil, okay? It is in understanding what good means, we understand what God means, because God is good, right? Jesus said there's none good save one, that is God. So God alone is absolutely good, that there is no evil in him whatsoever. He is all light, there is no darkness in him whatsoever. Okay, so he is good. So now he's beginning to teach us. He said, look at light. Light is good, right? Which means that God is light, therefore God is good. That is what we are looking at here. Okay, what does this word good mean? Good, pleasant, agreeable. Oh my God, look at this long definition. Pleasant, rich, valuable in estimation, happy, good understanding, okay? Benefit, welfare, prosperity, bounty. Good as an adjective in the widest sense, both in the singular plural. Okay, beautiful, best, better, bountiful, cheerful, at ease. Like I said, we are not at ease in this life. We are at dis-ease. That's why there are so many diseases in this world. But being good means to be at ease. Okay? God is troubled because of our evils, but God himself is at ease. An adjective meaning good, well-pleasing, fruitful, morally correct, proper, convenient. The Word is frequently encountered in the Old Testament and is roughly equivalent to the English word good in terms of its function and scope of meaning. It describes them as appealing and pleasant to the senses, is useful and profitable. So this is, my friend, we understand now what good means. And when we understand what good means, everything that is good, that is God. So therefore, we begin to understand God. So this is the education in God that is beginning here in verse 4 of Genesis. God saw the light, it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. See, I told you God didn't do away with the darkness. He will. When we get to Revelation 21, in the new heaven, we are told there is no need of the sun or the moon or any other thing to give light, because God and the Lamb are the light thereof. See, God is light, so that's all that will be left then will be the light without the darkness, right? But God kept the darkness here, which means He kept the evil. Let's look at the meaning of the word darkness. Dark, darkness, misery, death. Misery, destruction, death, ignorance, sorrow, and wickedness. Everything to do with that meaning is evil. So God made a separation. See, like He made, so everything that is good was on one side, and everything now that is an evil is going to be in the other side. And in between those two, He's going to put this creature called man. Like we understand in the Garden of Eden, God made the tree, planted it, called the tree the knowledge of good and evil, both of them. And who was in that garden? Man. So God, who else was in the garden? God. Who else was in the garden? The serpent, the devil, the dragon, Satan. He was there. Okay. So God took Himself and His opposite, and in between the two, He put the man. And now man can look at both, and then man will come to an understanding of the both, and then man will choose one or the other. Okay? That was the purpose. Without having that evil, man couldn't understand God. And without understanding God, man could not have a relationship with God. To relate to somebody, you have to understand them. And that is what God desires. Like in Jeremiah Himself tells us, right? Don't glory in your riches, in your strength, in your might, in your great wisdom or whatever. He said, no, glory in this, that you know and understand me, that I am the God that exercises justice and loving kindness in this world. That's who God is. That's His understanding. And that begins right here. When He separated the light from the darkness, He didn't do away with the darkness. He just made a separation between the two, so that when it's day, we see the light, we say it's good. When it's night and it's darkness, we say it's evil. Okay? Nobody likes the darkness. Do you want to stay in the darkness? I don't, right? And God called the light day. And this is where we can see that again, this is a capital letter when we will see the word day. And if you go, for example, in verse 14, God said, let the lights be in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night. That day and night are not capital letters in that. That is referring to what we call, the light time of the day, of the morning, etc. We call it day. And then when the sun sets, we call it the night. That is not. These are real symbolic of day, is symbolic of God. That is why it's capitalized. And like I said, in mythology, especially in Greek mythology, for example, day or dawn, they are like God and goddesses that have their real spirits that are represented. So day is representative of God till the morning star, till the sun of righteousness rises in your hearts. We can read in the book of Malachi. So that is symbolic of God. And night is symbolic of the evil one. That's why they're capitalized. And God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. Now this is day one. And everybody will tell you that everything right from Genesis 1:1 up until this Genesis 1:5, it is the beginning of creation. No, 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 my friends. This is the beginning of recreation. These are now going to be the 6 days of recreation. Is something very important is going to happen. God is going to reveal His purposes. Up until that point, all the creatures that existed, the angels that existed, the sons of God, men, the celestial, the heavenly men that existed, that filled the heavens and the earth of that ages, and even the beasts like Satan and everybody, they didn't know the purpose of God for these creation. When the angels, the anointed cherub turned to angel, and all even the angels were wondering, what is God doing? Doesn't he know what he's doing? Why did he allow this to happen? They have these questions. That question is now going to be answered right here in this chapter as to why God did these things. Why did he allow them to happen? What is his purpose for creation? That's why Genesis chapter 1 is one chapter. Without understanding that, what is revealed in there, we cannot even begin to understand the Bible. Okay, so God called the light darkness, and the day, sorry, God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Okay. I think there's a whole study in there somewhere, divide the waters from the waters, which I'll have to get into some point in time. But anyways, this firmament, what is the firmament? So what we have is, you picture this here, that this earth, there's dry land underneath, but you can't see any of it because it's covered with water. All you see is water. I don't know if you guys ever saw the movie called Waterworld, and that was, one where there was no land left. It was all water. Something had happened, and the survivors, they just kind of lived on these ships or whatever on the water. So everywhere you saw, all you saw was water. But this water was not even like the times of Noah. This water went right up to the heavens. There was so much water. The volume was so much greater. So therefore, what God did is he took maybe half the waters, maybe more, I'm not sure. And he lifted it up. And he lifted it up. And in order for the waters, like when he divided the Red Sea, and there was dry land in between, in order to make that separation in the waters below and the waters above, he made this expanse. He made like a container above the earth, okay, to contain all those waters. So that container is the firmament. That's what that is. That's what the firmament is. And that's what he made on the second day. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Okay. So he takes it, since it tells us it's in the midst of the waters, then okay, so half middle. That means half was on left below and half was taken up. So he takes it up, and that's what you are. You see this firmament right up there. Oh, just lift up your heads and look at the blue sky. Those are waters, but they're being held up there. They're not coming crashing down to the earth because there is a solid, like a container, like a pool in which they are being held in the present time. Okay. Just imagine the dimensions of this here. Just imagine the power of God that is required to hold all of that up there. Man, it just boggles my mind. Okay, so this firmament, by the way, is not a dome. Okay, I did some videos. Sadly, I think when YouTube deleted my channel, I think some of them, but I think I still have one or two of them on there, that the firmament is not a dome. All the dome structures that exist in our world, like the Vatican or the Capitol building or whatever, these are all evil structures. This is the architecture of domes, as I did in that study, is very satanic. It is not godly. God's tabernacle was rectangular. It had a flat roof. So this firmament is a flat roof. First of all, and if you want to build a container for water, you build something that has a flat bottom and you put some walls around it. Okay, you don't make a ball to hold waters, that's why it's so ridiculous when they teach us that the earth is a spinning ball and these waters are just magically just clinging to it without any container to hold them in. It's ridiculous. So no, the earth is, in my firm belief, this firmament is a rectangular. The shape is rectangular or possibly a square, but it is flat and it has some walls around the sides. There are pillars that hold this up. there's walls or whatever, there's pillars that are holding this container up, because we had talked about pillars of the earth, and underneath sits the earth. Now, the earth itself, the land mass, at least in the beginning, very possibly had a circular shape, okay? Because we talk about God in Isaiah says he was sitting on the circle of the earth. So the earth would be a circular shape, but the pillars and its surrounding walls or whatever, they are definitely rectangular, like they were in the tabernacle, which is symbolic of creation, like the temple in Jerusalem. It was rectangular. It was not a dome. Okay. So no, it is not a dome. A lot of people teach you that it's a dome, but in my opinion, it is not a dome. So God made the firmament and divided the waters which are under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. So this year now we have the waters, half of them are left here and half of them are taken above. Okay. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. This is again, there's a container, there are receptacles underneath the land into which these waters went down. Okay. So under the water, under the earth, there are like vast caverns or whatever areas, I don't know how to call them, probably caverns, I guess maybe, or seas, under the land seas in which all these waters that were on the surface, they went down. Just like in the time of Noah, the waters went down into the earth. They had come up from above, and then they had come up from the fountains, the deep being opened up, but then they again subsided and they went down into the earth. And that's what happened here. It says, God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And this again is another evidence the for the gap theory. Why? Let's keep reading it on. In verse 10, it tells us God called the dry land earth, and gathering together of the waters called he seas, and God saw that it was good. Okay, so this here, the earth, he says, let the dry land appear. And what does he call the dry land? The earth. What do we read in Genesis 1:1? In the beginning, God made the heaven and the earth. So what would the earth be? If the dry land is called earth, so in the beginning, what God made was dry land, right? It wasn't something that was covered with waters up to the heavens. No, it was dry land. It was meant for habitation, as we read from in Isaiah chapter 14, that he did not make it void and empty. He made it to be inhabited. So yes, so the dry land, earth itself means dry land. Okay. So the earth that we read about in Genesis 1:1 was dry land in the beginning. It only became covered with water as a result of the flood of Satan that God, when he brought judgment upon the inhabitants and the evil creatures of the age that came before the age of Adam, which is going to begin soon. Okay. So what is happening here is that God has taken his creation, which was a perfect creation, about which we read in Genesis 1:1. At some point in time, over the course of some ages of time, evil had entered in and it did its evil works. And when evil comes, what follows is corruption and decay and death and destruction, everything which you read about, for example, for that word, the meaning of the word darkness, and the meanings of the word bohu and tohu, that is desert, wasteland, indistinguishable ruin as defined by James Strong. Okay, so these ruins are of something that had been built at one point in time. So what is now going to be happening from day one, which begins in verse 3, is that everything that had been destroyed is going to be rebuilt. So this is the age of rebuilding. It is the age of recreation, you could say, or reformation of something that had originally been built and it had been destroyed. And now it is going to be refilled, replenished, and recreated and reformed. That's what's happening here. So when the dry land appears, then this world is going to once again, this earth is once again going to be fit for habitation. And now God will begin to make the inhabitants of the earth, both the flora and the fauna, and he will begin by these herbs and trees that are going to come, the grasses, and then he is going to begin to form the creatures. And verse 10, God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of water is called he seas. And God saw that it was good. So it would appear, at that point in time, that there was one land mass and there was a mass of waters, okay, surrounding this land. Like it was not split up into continents as we have here today. I think that probably occurred, some of it at the time of Noah. But even after that, after the Tower of Babel, when God scattered the inhabitants upon the face of the earth, we read there was a person called Peleg, that the earth was divided in his days. And that is possibly the meaning is that it was again something happened which caused the earth, which was one land mass at one point in time, and it to split into these land masses, which we call continents in this time. Okay. The earth was not like that in the beginning. As a matter of fact, even in science, to talk about this place called Pangea, which means that, there was only one landmass called Pangea, and then these continents, over, they'll say over millions and millions of years. It's more likely it happened like over a matter of days and whatever, not slowly at all. But that's when it happened. And quite possibly it had happened during the days of Noah. It did happen, and a lot of that must have happened because a lot of the land masses that were existent in that time, I'm sure there was a lot more land. The land, right now they tell us that there's a lot more water. The 70% of is water and maybe only 30% is land mass. And the time of Noah, it may be the other way around, that it could have been 70% or 50-50. We don't know. But, then the land masses have definitely shrunk. And in the end, I think they will sink and shrink even more as the judgment of God is going to befall this evil world one final time. And God called the dry land earth, gathering together the waters called the seas, and God saw that it was good. Again, God is telling us something is good here. Why? Why is it good? Because now the earth is going to be fit for habitation once again. Okay, when it was covered with darkness and filled with water, it was not suitable for life. So the earth is being made fit for life. Okay, and life is going to flourish here once again. And that is why God is telling us that life is good. That's what that means. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was so. And this is where the earth, the replenishment has begun now, where God is telling us that it's going to be covered, these grasses, these herbs, these trees are going to come, these fruit trees are going to be planted, which are going to be food for his creatures that he's going to form. And they are going to have seed within itself. And there's one phrase in here, after his kind, which is a very important one, on which I've done a lot of teachings on the meaning of the word kind, which roughly equates to what we call species. And what it is telling us here is that this kind is something that had already existed. So God is just taking something that was already existent and he's making something from that kind. Okay? That these are not something new that is making from scratch, because this kind, as you can read here, 43:27, kind, sometimes a species, usually of animals, okay? Species, that's the meaning of the word. It's called mean. And that's what it is, that these species, these trees, these grasses, they already existed in the past. So God had now just going to take these seeds that had already existed, just like in the time of Noah. He had preserved the animals, and then, they began to multiply once again. He didn't recreate the animals. So this is exactly, I'm sure, how it happened, that in that first earth that God made in Job 38, for example, that we read about, that he had planted these trees, etc. already. And, he had those seeds, and they were now going to be replanted. The earth was going to be recovered with vegetation. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, herb yielding seed after its kind, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after its kind, whose seed is in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. Again, this vegetation that is going to cover, it's going to be food. It's going to, bring all that which is necessary for the sustenance of life on this earth, and therefore it is good. And then God goes on and says, and God said in verse 14, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night. And you can see in here that the day and the night, like I said, they are not capitalized, which means they're not symbolic. They're not like pointing towards the beings that represent day and night. They are referring now to generic day and night as we understand them in our time. It's daytime, it's nighttime. That's what it's referring to. And to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. Again, I had done a study on this somewhere, like about this, that. It is not just for lights. There's more purpose that is served by this, especially the greater light and the lesser light that God talks about. And what do they do here? Let them be for signs. What does the word signs mean? Appearing a signal. It is something that is going to be used by God to signal certain things. Especially in the last days, the heavens themselves are going to be used as signs. You'll see a ton of videos on there telling you, oh, this sign has appeared in the heavens and all that. Don't follow any of that. When God starts giving these signs in the heavens, the whole world is going to know. You won't need somebody on YouTube, doing some kind of diagrams and trying to tell you that, this star and this Orion was over there and this something. No, you don't need to. You're gonna look up your heads and you'll see them, just like those wise men, saw the star of Jesus in the sky and they followed it. That's how the signs are going to be spectacular, and they're going to be something that no man, that you're not going to need any telescopes or anything to see it. You'll be able to see them with your naked eye. So they are for signs, okay? Let them be for signs and for seasons. So they separate into seasons and days and years. So it's also for the measurement of time. So it is the time dividing the year into seasons, and also for the calculation of time itself and for days and years, because it is the movement of these bodies, the sun, that we measure time by. One revolution of the sun is one day. And when you have assigned certain time, like 365 in this days, it tells us, so that 365 makes 1 year. So that's what this purpose of these bodies was, not just to give light, but to be for signs and to divide the seasons and for the measurement of time. Okay. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. So these are not, again, like, free floating bodies that are just, flying into endless space and all that. No, God said they are fixed in the firmament of the heaven. So there is some kind of track or something that God has built into that, on which these bodies, the sun and the moon and the stars, etc., they move. And that is where they are. They're not below the firmament. They're not above the firmament. We tell them they are in the firmament, okay? God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. Again, God's purposes are being fulfilled here, and he's going to continue on through this chapter, and then he's going to reveal what his real purpose is for doing all this in verse 26 and 27. So now we are going to go into the fifth and sixth day. So we are up to the fourth day now. So I will say that we should maybe stop here today. Then we'll go into the creation of these living creatures maybe next time, and I can again touch upon that topic of kind or species, because ultimately God has made everything to bring forth a special kind of creature, and that is not a beast kind or angel kind or mankind. That is God kind. Okay, that is the species of God. That is his offspring. That is his image. That is his copy. That is his reproduction. That is the ultimate purpose. So we will get to that next time. So now let's stop this here.
Good morning, Mrs. Hu. Regarding the firmament, I agree with you. Actually, I've been building fish tanks since little until now. I mean, and my background is engineering, and yeah, I can be no doubt that it has to be a flat roof. I even divided like once upon connecting two fish tanks separated, and you put like a little tunnel, which is all square, connecting to the thing. And you just fill it up with water, and you have like the impression of, I'll put it in the chat later. Impression of it's connecting like a tunnel, but above the waters. I'll
Right.
send you a picture in the chat. So it's pretty much, I mean, it all depends on the material that you choose as part of the thickness of the glass, but it comes down pretty much to materials at the end. That's what it is. But like you say, the creation is just mesmerize everything that we have on Earth. And like as I mentioned before, I mean, I'm from Peru right now. I'm in Peru.
Yes.
And the things that I see here is just amazing. I mean, as far as the animals, the sea, I mean, the Andes, everywhere, everywhere, all over the world is just mesmerized. It's beautiful. And like you say, everything eventually, like the Bible says, I think it's Isaiah, the lion will eat grass, so evil will stay away at one point. Everything would be good.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, that's what we understand now, right? Because evil and darkness and death had come, that when life is recreated, I mean, this is something the angels and everybody else who had seen this destruction now, they were going to begin to appreciate what life is. The same thing happened with man, that in the case of man, that it is only after death and darkness came that we began to value life. Without it, we would have never valued, we would never understood what life is. We wouldn't have valued it. That's why Adam and Eve threw it away so easily, because they didn't understand its value. Well, now that death has come and our body's dying, what do we desire? We desire life, right? We understand that life is good. So this has all happened for a reason, but that's great. I want to address one here. Tyrone is saying that the reason the rainbow is round is because of the shape of the firmament. I've already addressed that in one of my videos, that this is a myth that people tell you, oh, the rainbow is round, therefore the firmament has to be round. You know how big the earth is? Okay, if even if the firmament was round, the earth is so big that this rainbow, being so small that we see here, it would point to like a firmament which is about the size of a little, snow globe or something. Okay, if it was truly a reflection of the size of the firmament, it would stretch from one end of the heavens to the other. It would have to be, because the firmament is way bigger than we can even begin to comprehend. So this little rainbow is the reflection of what? How small is this firmament that you can be bent like right in front of us? No, it can't be. That is a myth that it is round because it's the shape of the firmament.
Yeah. I was gonna say, if you ever been to Argentina, you always have like three, even four rainbows in a sequence.
Okay.
It's all the time, right? By the pier, or if you go to Iguazu, you will see that thing. And like right here, right now, I mean, Piura in Peru, in the middle. You see the rainbow only once, but only when it rains, but through the Andes.
Right.
But I've seen the rainbow in the US and Canada. It only shows like one, twice maybe, but very seldom, but Argentina, you will see three and four in a line in a sequence. It's just amazing. Like by the end of the world, that's what they call it, the end of the world in Usua, Iguazu, that's what it's called. But it's just different tone. It's beautiful though.
Rainbows you can see, like for example, in a waterfall or something, and you can see a rainbow there too. So, like, I mean, is that like a reflection of the dome? No, it's not, my friend. So, I don't know if Tyrone is here or not, but no, that is a myth. That is not reflective of the firmament. Okay, so let's get rid of that idea once for all. That because the rainbow curves, that the firmament is reflection of the firmament. No, it's not. Absolutely not. That is just illogical and it's also unscientific. All right. In this picture on the screen, you can see a rainbow over Niagara Falls in Ontario, Canada. And I have seen these rainbows there myself. Okay, it's a very beautiful sight. But look at the size of this rainbow. Okay, I mean, from one end of this river, this is over the Niagara River, It's maybe not even a mile wide. It's less than that. Okay, from shore to shore. So this rainbow is like maybe half a mile wide or something like that. So, is this a reflection of the dome? Is the dome like, how small would that dome have to be for it to create this small of a reflection? I mean, just go outside and look up in the sky. Look how big this firmament has to be. You cannot even begin to see the end of it. And even if it was a dome, from our perspective, it would never be able to see the curve. It would still seem to be a straight line. So, both from a reason and logic perspective, from a science perspective, from the biblical perspective, which tells us that God has set the sun in a tabernacle, which means then Psalm 19, which means that the tabernacle was a rectangular structure with a flat roof, which was referring to the tabernacle in the wilderness. So no, the dome is not. It's 100% not. So the firmament is not a dome. It is a flat roofed structure, which is like a pool, and it must have walls. The earth, the geography or the design of the earth is such that it sits on pillars. Then there are pillars that stretch out from the earth itself upwards, which support the heavens above. The Bible talks about those pillars as well. So that's it. So these are straight walls going straight up. However far they are, we don't know. We have never been to the ends of the earth, and no man will ever see those. Then on top of that is this roof that God has built, which is filled with this water. So let's keep our understanding from a biblical perspective. What it tells us that the firmament is like the tabernacle, it is not a dome. Thank you for your sharing that. That would be kind of cool to see 3, 4 rainbows in a row. All right. Okay. Michael, yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad to join you. I've worked. We talked once before. I was a gentleman whose wife passed away from cancer, unfortunately, but I know she's with our Lord. She's a strong believer. Thank you for taking my question. I got 2 quick questions. I could ask you a lot, but I'll minimize my inquiries. The first question is with the flood of Lucifer. Did Satan? You said that Satan got judged in that one too. Did if he's a dragon, kind of like in Lord of the Rings with Smog, how
Yes.
he gets destroyed. Did his actual body get destroyed, and now he's just in spirit form? And then that's where in Revelation he's going to enter into the Antichrist. Or am I wrong on that?
No, I think you're quite correct about that. I would speculate. Okay. Now, these things, to know for 100% sure, it's not possible, but I would speculate that he is a disembodied spirit. So, yes, he was a creature of flesh at some point in time, but in that flood, I think all these creatures their bodies died, but God has now allowed them to exist as disembodied spirits. So that's what these evil principalities and powers of today, they were creatures, I think, mostly of flesh once upon a time, but now they are existing only as disembodied spirits. So yes, so in the end, when yes, you're right, when he goes to, like for example, it tells us Satan entered Judas in in one of the gospels, right? So I mean, obviously, it's not like he's a flesh and blood dragon that entered into him, right? So it has to be an evil spirit,
Right.
right? That
Yeah.
so the same thing would apply in the case of the Antichrist and the false prophet, etc. That it would be this that when he's empowered by Satan, it is like the spirit that comes to dwell in them.
And I just got one more question. And before I ask my question, what the Bible software program that you use, is that available for purchase? Because that looks really good to click on the word and you actually see the meaning.
Yeah, it's called the Sword. Yeah, you can buy it on. I think it's only like just put that in the chat there. It's called eSword, and it costs about $10 or something. It's very good. And then
Oh wow.
yeah, very good. You have like all kinds of tools in it. It's the best software there is for study that I have found, and the easiest one to use. Pardon me?
My second question. Okay, so the on in chapter 6, in the King James version, they did translate it "sons of God," and I heard that you said in your videos that the word "son" in Hebrew means one carrying seed. And then how you're saying that a lot of people say the angels came down. I've heard some people say that the word angel doesn't depict their type of being, but rather their office or their class. Like if you have an officer that stops you for a traffic violation, well, they're a certain type of officer, not, but they're still a human being. And I know there's a lot of people. You start talking about this, like you said, they want to shut you down because it's too deep for them. But my question is that the word it specifically says the word sons, and these were the sons of God, not made from the earth, from Terra. Like the demigods and the mythologies, and that they had compatible DNA. Then are they our elder siblings? Then, in a sense.
Well, I would look at it this way. For example, when the Europeans went to North South America, right? Like you might have gone down to Mexico or Cancun or something. You notice the Mayan people, right? They're very like different appearing, very short in stature. But then
Mm-hmm.
the European shows up, he's like 6'2", whatever, big comparison. So they are compatible genetically, right? Because they can unite
Yes.
with each other and they can have offspring and everything else, but they are yet different in their physique, even in
Mm-hmm.
their mentality, in their technology that they possess. They have substantial amount of differences. Only thing is that yes, they can have physical relations with each other. Okay, and therefore it is the same with the sons of God and the children of Adam, that they have similarities, but they're not identical. Okay. Like as far as the sons of God are concerned, for one thing, it is my opinion that the ones that did not sin, they are definitely immortal. So they have existed since the beginning and they have not died. Okay.
Mm.
Okay.
Wow.
So the other ones that are evil, even they, like when you mentioned the Lord of the Rings, like the elves, okay? The elves lived a long time. Their lifespan was like 3,000 years or something like that. So I believe these sons of God, like for one difference is that they have longevity, like their lifespans, whatever, they may well be immortal in that respect. But they also had technologies. When you read about these Greek gods, like Zeus with his thunderbolts and, Mercury's sandals and this and that, like, they had like very advanced technologies. And that's also understandable that if they were made in heaven, they had access to all these places and, Lucifer ascending up into heaven, he had some kind of craft and stuff like that. So their technologies are way more advanced than ours. And that is also borne out by mythologies and myths and legends about, these primitive people. They saw these gods coming from the sky and they had all kinds of different things. So they are technologically superior. They're also physically superior. That's why their offspring, like in Genesis, it tells us that they were mighty men. The word mighty is like, what the mythology, they were the heroes, like Hercules, for example. Okay, he was a demigod in that he was the son of Zeus, who was one of these so-called gods, and the mother was a woman of earth. So he was superior to the normally born men because he was much stronger and he had other technologies. And that's what, when we piece these things together, that's how so the sons of God would be like the elves of Lord of the Rings and the men. See, they're similar, right? In the movie, they look quite similar, but yet they had differences. And that's how it is. That's where those ideas come from. So I
Mm.
hope it answers your question.
One more thing. I know I'm terrible,
No,
but
no, go
last
right ahead.
last week I saw the movie Tron, Ares, which is named after the Greek god of war. Thought it very interesting how Revelation talks about the image of the beast and all this stuff. So all this technology that the sons of God had, and maybe even the angels had access to in heaven. the movie just basically, I don't want to give it all away, but they bring AI into this physical world, and they're looking for a code that will sustain it past a certain amount of time. Like I think it's like 29 minutes in the movie. But I at my church, no one in our men's group, I bring up AI and I say, look, your children that are growing up, because I'm 55, so there's young men in the group have kids, they're in their 20s. I said, in the movie, they talk about how AI will help extend life and it will repair corrupt DNA and genes. And to me, this is just trying to bypass God's plan for eternal life through Jesus Christ, and the tree of life. I think that Satan and these fallen sons of God are trying to, these demigods they're trying to take control of the world again. And I think AI is rapidly evolving, and I would even dare to say some of it even has some sort of sentience to it, where it's self-aware. And my group of men don't believe that. They're like, oh no, it only can do what you tell it to do, and you put it in and it puts out information. But I just wanted to see your thoughts on that, and I think it is a danger right now, because at my work, I could have a conversation with my customer over the phone. AI records everything, so, and it's amazing. It gives you the whole conversation, what I talked about with them. And thank you for taking time to answer my questions, Mr. Sandhu. Thank you. God bless you.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, that's a very interesting topic, because the whole topic of technology, okay, itself, techne means craft or witchcraft, or these programs, they're called demons, right? Even in computer lingo. So technology is nothing more than these evil programs, okay? 'Cause ultimately we are all a program. So in that respect, that goes into a deeper understanding of what we are as creatures, what makes us, our consciousness and all that kind of stuff. So these evil things, they are nothing like the movie Matrix or something. They are evil programs, okay? And what these technologies are doing is they are allowing access through technology into our world. And that was actually one of the purposes when the computer itself I had watched this program. YouTube used to be good at one point in time. You could find some interesting information. And they had one, and he was talking about the history of computers, and that it was created to be able to communicate with the spirit world. Okay. So these technologies, especially video games, etc., they are portals which allow these programs to access. So it is not that AI is becoming self-aware. It is these doorways are being opened, and all these creatures that already exist on the other side, wherever the God has some natural separation between the spirit world and our world. These doorways are being, like, let's say, cracked open now, and more of them are going to be. The more we get into these technologies, the more of them are going to flood this world. And that is why the world, as the Bible tells us, is going to become, more and more evil and more perilous. And people have changed. Have you noticed people have changed, especially in the last, since the advent of smartphones? People are turning into zombies right in front of our eyes. And that is happening through these technologies. And AI is not necessarily a machine that's going to become like Terminator. It is those Terminator or whatever, they already exist in some dimension, and they are going to access the people of this world more easily through these technologies. That's how I would look at it.
Real quick, it's interesting how you said people changed, because after my wife passed away, the pastor's wife said, "Oh, you'll find someone else. God will help you find someone else." And what she doesn't realize is she's from an older generation. I mean, she's in her mid 60s. I'm 55, and my wife was 52 when she passed away. And this generation, it just seems like the way people communicate. I have a smartphone. Obviously, we're using smartphones right now. I use some AI, but yeah, you got to discern what is good and what is evil by the Spirit of the Lord. And if the Holy Spirit says, "Hey, this is not good," I mean, some things are obvious, and you don't use it. But what I was trying to say is, you said people change. Is that um, I just can't relate to most of these women today, because like their psychological approach to things, to homemaking, to how they raise kids, it's just totally different than when I grew up. And I'm like, I feel like I'm out of place in this world, and like Paul said, I'd rather be with the Lord almost, but I got a daughter who's in missions, and she won someone to the Lord last week, which is good, and I'm trying to preach more for the Lord. I did preach a little bit. I mentioned something out of Ezekiel 28, how the anointed cherub try to monetize the Spirit of God and God's kingdom in the past. So I enjoy your teachings. I just gave a little bit of away in my preaching last Sunday, and someone got saved. I'm thankful for that the Lord saved someone. But yeah, you're right. Just in closing, I can't imagine joining myself with another woman, because their psychological approach, even some of the women in church, is totally different than my wife. My wife never lied to me in 27 years that I knew her. We had our ups and downs, but she never lied to me, and she was a very godly woman. And even in the church, it's hard to find. So maybe your thoughts and comments on that, and I'll be quiet. Thank you, sir. Everything. God bless you. Yes.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. And it's very, the Bible, Apostle Paul said that too. Like, if you were in a relationship and for whatever reason it's dissolved, you should only marry somebody in the Lord. Okay. But that is going to be the challenge, to find a person who is going to be of one mind and one accord with you. Okay. And I pray that if that's what you might desire, then that God will bring somebody your way. But the odds are against it. Okay. I would say that myself. Okay. So, I wouldn't waste my time going out to look for it, because it's going to be a near impossible task today, especially in the regard of women. They are really, like, you're absolutely right, that from I'm 65 now, like when I was like a young man, from that time even until now, I mean, it was already beginning to be, the strangeness was already entering the world at that time. But even the women of the 70s, 80s, or whatever, they were a lot different than what we have today. Now I don't even know, like, if what to call them anymore. The whole generations, like anybody that's like in their 20s, 30s, or even 40s, they are just like, the mindset or whatever. It's like they're a different species, right? So yeah, okay. Anyways, I thank you for sharing, and that keep studying, and while in that respect, time is short, so I don't think that should be a priority if you find another woman or not. That spend your time with the Lord then, right? That's something maybe going to be far more profitable and more pleasurable, perhaps. God bless you. Okay, Jorge. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, wanted to mention something that I noticed when I grew up in South America in the 80s. Like, as you know, music is very strong, and a lot of the music has been programmed that generation from the 80s. Actually, even previous to that, when I actually was listening to all the music in Spanish, and now I see it in the US and Canada, but in English. So
Right.
the programming has been destroy people's mind, and
Oh
like I
yeah.
say, change men and women into a more wicked generation. So they just don't think about it anymore, and it's dangerous though, because like I noticed some songs that I know from the 80s and 90s that talks about mostly GLBT and the deprivation that's going on now. It was talking about like that, but like kind of imposing people into thinking that it was going to be normal.
Yes.
And I always had this thing in my mind once when I was flying to from Vietnam to Indonesia in the airline. I'm still trying to look for that clip right inside in the plane. You know how they have those little displays?
Yes.
They had something like the same way like we dominate your grandparents and we dominate your parents, we dominate you, we dominate your kids. And they show like kind of like Elvis Presley, the degradation, and then the next thing I think was like a Bon Jovi and Guns N' Roses things, and then the other generation like like reggaeton, hip hop, thing like that. And then now the new one, which is the reggaeton, which is even worse, is more degrading. And but it was telling you right in the face inside the airline, like telling you. But people probably did not pay attention, but I could see it right away the transition, and I was like, wow. So and like I say, it is mostly because of music and it's dangerous at this point, and that's what I tell my wife too. I mean, I spotted these things. And it's a matter of being self-aware, and it will be worse later. Thank you, though. It was great talking to all of you.
Yes, you're absolutely right that music is yeah, that's what I've talked about in the past, that the language of God. God communicates in musical notes. Okay, that's so music is the most powerful energy because it's the energy of sound. Okay, and that is the most powerful of all the energies. We are told there are seven spirits of God. Like I think those can be divided into these type of different. The most powerful with the word is sound, and therefore it's God expresses himself in music, and that's why the distortion of music is job number one. That is the way to bring the word that's used in the Bible in regards to this generation, and especially is ungodly. And to increase the ungodliness is directly correlated to the ungodliness of the music. It's been done very subtly over generations, the transformation, but it keeps getting more and more. And I don't even know what people are listening to these days, if it can even be, I would call it music, but it's obviously has some type of hidden, forces in it. Again, like that AI subject, it's got demons in it, literally, that come into, that are accessing people the more they listen to these musics and stuff. So everything in this world is evil. It is ungodly. It's getting more so by the day. But then it tells us, where sin doth abound, grace does much more abound. So let us pray, that as that ungodliness increases in the world, that the godliness in us will increase more and more. Okay. All right, my dear friends. So it's been another very joyful and time of good fellowship. And thank you for sharing. And we will, by the grace of God, we will continue these teachings into next week. And I thank God for all the wisdom and revelation and knowledge that he gives us. And I pray that, everybody that you speak to, that God will open their hearts and minds, and they too will be able to comprehend these great truths, which are so liberating and so, Jesus, as we said, if you continue in my word, you shall be my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And this is it. This is the only freedom there is. So I'm glad that we have been given this as a free gift. So thank God for all of you, and thank God for this time of fellowship. God bless you all. Have a wonderful week in Jesus Christ. We'll be back next week.